I'm not sure if there was a particular phrase from what I was reading about that directly led to it, but the idea of us not, again, that uncertainty. We don't actually really know who we are. We don't have perfect knowledge of ourselves. We don't know who we are until we're forced to decide.
Hey guys, this is Luke Machin here, and you're watching and listening to LiveProg.
Malcolm, it is a pleasure to meet you.
Thank you very much for chatting and your time.
I think I came across the name Hats Off Gentlemen, It's Adequate somewhere at the end of last year.
Okay.
So I'm kind of late to the party. I noticed. I believe you guys are around since 2012 or maybe even before that. So for some reason, you've gone completely past me. But you know, I came across the name and I was like, wow, that's like a whole sentence for a name. And I was like, I gotta know more about that. So I started listening to the music and I was curious. So I decided, maybe it's nice to have a chat and get to know.
Yes, thank you for
get to know you a little bit better. So obviously, the first thing I am curious about is the name. How do you come up with that name? And
so there's a couple of different aspects here. One is it's a self-deprecating take on the Robert Schumann did a review of Chopin, which he said, "Hats off, gentlemen, a genius," and so it's a playful, understated version of that. Also, I just had in my mind the image of Edwardian gentlemen throwing their hats in the air and shouting huzzah about something not being great, but just being in the middle. Maybe a bit influenced by the Philip K. Dick story, in which the person who gets to be in charge is the person who's decided to be most average. So that's probably where the phrase, some of the ways that the phrase came about. Having said that, it doesn't actually reflect the music very much, and it's not very practical for posters for festivals or anything like that.
Yeah.
But when I chose the name, I hadn't anticipated that things would take off in the way that they have. You know, a name that's, you know, basically, you know, I was asked, what name do you want to be introduced as when I was doing a tiny thing in a pub for 10 minutes, and you know, came up with a name, and then 10 years or so later, you're stuck with it.
That's the thing, yeah. I mean, it's something I've learned myself as well. That sometimes you come up with something and then later on you find, it might not be the practical thing, but yeah, you can't change it.
If we're looking up for reviews and things, there are not many other bands that come up when we search with that name. So, you know, the pros and cons.
That's true, and you definitely stand out with it. And I personally think it's a great name. I really like it very much. So, I think, tying in with that, of course, is how did Hats Off, Gentlemen, It's Adequate? How did it start?
So now the band is basically myself and Mark Gatland. So I sing and play guitar and keyboards and produce, and he plays bass and also adds additional guitars and keyboards. And when we play live, he runs the computer as well. So now it's predominantly us as a duo, really. But when we used to play together many years ago when we were at school. And then I went off and became a doctor for a while, and got distracted for a few decades. And then I took part in a hospital pantomime where I got positive feedback about my singing. Not so much for the acting, to be honest. But pantomime isn't necessarily my it doesn't particularly fit my fairly deadpan style of
Mm.
delivery. So, but the singing, I got people encouraging me to go and do more concerts, and I've been writing songs and classical music as well, but not really doing much with it for many years. And so I
Yeah.
started going to initially open mic nights and jam nights, and then getting invited then to do featured slots, and it gradually took off from there. And also, I met people at jam nights that I did stuff with. At one stage, we were up to five of us at a time,
Mm.
but then with people having to move for different reasons, and it ended up being predominantly myself and Mark now when we play
Yeah.
live. And then Catherine, to whom I'm married, plays Catherine Thomas plays flute on in some of our gigs, but mostly on the albums.
Okay. So
And then
sometimes.
I sometimes manage to drag my children to do some vocals, backing vocals and things.
Okay. Yeah. So it's a bit of a family thing then,
Yeah, yeah,
going a family business. Yeah. You mentioned that you went out to be a doctor.
yeah.
That's yeah. What kind of a
So I was
doctor?
a neuropathologist. So I was mostly diagnosing brain tumors, investigating neurological causes of death, um, advising on what treatments for different types of brain cancer, and also inflammatory muscle and nerve disease. And I used to do a lot of teaching, and I had an academic interest in cognitive errors and how they lead to misdiagnoses.
Okay. That's quite something different than yeah
Yeah.
than being in music. But during that time, did music still play some part in your
Oh,
life?
very much so. Yeah. So I was always interested both in the biological side and the musical side. So I did sciences and music at A level at school, and I started on the tuba. That was my classical instrument,
Oh, okay.
and so I used to play in local orchestras and wind bands and brass quintets.
Yeah.
Um, and I used to write about classical music, particularly contemporary classical music, for various places, and do some consultancy on contemporary chamber music repertoire for a
Okay.
small record label and things like that.
Yeah.
So while I was doctoring, I was also still writing about music, but it was mostly classical music I was involved with at that stage. Although I've always had particular passion for Pink Floyd, Marillion, and those kind of bands. Um, and then it was later on that I was initially I was writing songs, but I didn't have anyone to sing them. I didn't really see myself as a singer at that stage,
Yeah.
and then I just started to sing them in the absence of somebody else wanting to or being available to, and it kind of took off from there really.
And then at a certain point, you and Mark got together and decided to well
Yeah,
take it
so
more like a band.
so he came and he's always been involved in music and bands. So he was in numerous bands while I was otherwise engaged. And then he came along to one of my like a solo acoustic type performance I was doing, and he was like, "Oh, yeah, you like that, and we should go back to doing stuff." And although we hadn't played together for decades,
Yeah.
it just clicked straight away because we used to
Okay.
play together a lot when we were at school. So we've been playing since we were about 12, 11, 12, something like that.
Oh, wow. Yeah. So you guys know each other for a really long time.
Yeah, and that I think has a big impact, particularly on our live performances, because I think we just basically sort of know what the other person's going to do without
Yeah.
anybody having to say anything, or just with a look. You can communicate a lot when you know someone so well, and it feels to me it feels a very safe space performing with Mark. You've got
Yeah.
each other's backs, and
Yeah,
yeah,
yeah. I guess that's important. I mean, if you're like just a duo or with three people on stage, and well, the I mean, progressive rock is a little bit more complex, so you have to be good in tune to each other. So
Yeah.
it's nice that you guys have that. Now, um, what I mentioned about that you guys kind of passed me by. I kind of missed everything. I understood that in 2017 something happened that kind of changed things a little bit for you.
Oh, is this the Hard Rock Hell
Yeah,
Festival? Yeah. So
yeah.
we had a phone call saying, "Oh, would we be interested in playing at Hard Rock Hell Prog Festival, which is one of probably the UK's biggest prog residential festival." And yeah, we would very much like to. And could we get there the next day? And then trying to work out how to do that. It was another band had broken an arm, and it was could we get there very rapidly? It was the other end of the country. It was in North Wales,
Oh wow.
and it's not that easy to get to at short notice if you're not. I can't drive, so we're dependent on trains, and also we were. And you are aware, it'll be two of us plus a laptop, and I love real drums. For various medical reasons, it works much better for me that we play as two of us plus a laptop. It means we can rehearse in my flat. I can lie down while we're doing stuff. We don't have to worry about disturbing people. It
Yeah.
just is very practical. I've got various medical things, and it just makes it. It means I'm able to get out and perform.
Hmm.
But I'm aware that, for a prog audience used to large lineups, lots and lots of drums and
Yeah.
multiple banks of keyboards, just two men turning up with what we can carry on the train. We were a bit nervous, but
Yeah.
then when we first arrived, we went to the small stage, the couple of stages, and said who we were, and they're like, "Oh no, you're not on the list for here." It's like, "Oh, well, that's a
Okay.
bit awkward." But on the other hand, we've been, at least we get to a free festival, get to see some bands and things. Oh well, that's a shame. And they say, "No, you're on it's the wrong stage. You're meant to be on the main stage." I'm not suggesting it was because we were well known enough to justify that. It was that the band who had a broken arm, that was where they were due. So it was a really sort of high profile slot for us in front of probably about 1,000 people, which is very different to the the four people in a pub type things that I was used to before then,
Yeah.
realistically, for most of my gigs. And it was an amazing experience, to have all the big lights and amps and
Yeah.
big stages, and the response was very, very supportive, and we got some very good reviews and the festival's own in-house magazine described us as like the unlikely stars who stole the show, which is I can agree on the unlikely stars. I'm not suggesting we stole the show, but nonetheless it is a lovely phrase to be able to then
Yeah.
use when we're trying to get other festival gigs, and that really opened lots of doors for us. And then
Okay.
since then we've been regularly playing at UK prog festival circuit and having a lovely time.
Yeah, that I can imagine that. But at the same time, I mean, if you're called a day in advance that you performing, I mean, did you have any music that you thought like, okay, this is what we can play? Or I mean, you have to worry about that as well.
Yeah, this is one of the advantages, though, of it being two of us who know each other well, that we can put something together pretty quickly. Um, so, yeah, we were a bit nervous, and it was a bit hectic, but it worked out well.
Yeah, okay, wow. Well, it's nice to hear that that also opened more doors for you, and
Oh,
that
definitely, yeah, that was a big thing for us.
yeah, and also for the music, did get more stimulants to keep going.
Oh, we certainly. The first album I did, it was I didn't really imagine anybody was going to hear it other than probably me and my mum. It was like a kind of for my own benefit, because I fancied having recorded an album, released an album, but I didn't really anticipate it getting listened to much. And hopefully since then I've also learnt a bit more about songwriting and production and mixing and mastering. But the first, over our first few albums, we just were starting to gradually build up more broadcasters and writers who were interested in what we were doing, and gradually building up an audience. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Now I've been looking over the albums that you've released ever since you started, because I was of course curious, like what can I expect? And I noticed several kind of, how do you say, themes or influences
Yeah.
coming back at a lot of these albums.
Yeah.
And it's history,
Yes.
science, but also
Yeah.
personal things. And then I'm
Yeah.
kind of also referring to the T-shirt you're wearing.
Oh
But
yeah, so I'm tired and everything else. So,
yeah.
I mean, the reason I'm no longer a doctor is over time I had to gradually cut down on my hours. I've got Ehlers-Danlos Syndrome, which is a genetic disease that affects well, it affects the joints and causes chronic pain and fatigue, but it also affects pretty much any body system. It's due to mutations in the connective tissues that hold everything together. So yeah, I get a lot of pain, and it also affects the autonomic nervous system. So times when you don't get enough blood flow to your brain and things get a bit foggy and confusing. And I'm also now having problems of, I've got a retinal degenerative problem as well, which is annoying.
Yeah.
But in terms of the medical job, I carried on doing it when it was just hurting me. I mean, that's a shame, but I mean, I can accept that. But I wanted to make sure that I didn't put anybody else at risk, because it is quite. I mean, you're looking down a microscope, hunting for cancer cells, and if you're doing that in pain, or if you've got an episode of autonomic problems where you're not able to concentrate properly. Also, I vomit a lot. It's it was important to me that I stopped before putting anybody at risk, which as far as I'm aware is what happened. I didn't, once I got to the stage where I just couldn't cope anymore because of the pain and was finding it too difficult to concentrate, I just had to stop. But I knew that point was coming for a number of years, because it's something that just as I was trying to keep working, it was just getting worse as various things degenerated. And every few years I would cut down the number of hours and cut down my pay as well, but get more and more part-time. But also I've got quite an active mind. I don't want to just do nothing. So I would then in the free time I would be writing music, but I have to spend most of my time lying down. So I do a lot of my composing with a laptop on my chest, lying down, and that's how the album's initially written. So that's how my life changed from being a hospital consultant to an obscure composer.
Okay, wow. Yeah, that's quite something. And I can imagine that also has an influence on when you perform live.
Yes. So, I mean, having chronic pain, I don't think with the doctor side, other than maybe having more empathy with people who are suffering, has any kind of very obvious positive side to it, to be honest. It's just unpleasant. With the performing, it's how I express my frustrations and anger and emotional things, because in offstage life I'm not very emotionally expressive. I'm restrained and English, and
Yeah.
you know what I mean. I'm not really demonstrative of how I'm feeling much. But the one time where I do get to do that is when I'm on stage. And if I've been having a particularly painful day, then it may well come out in a more aggressive performance.
Okay. Okay. So you're kind of channeling it to,
Yeah,
use.
trying to get
Yeah.
something, trying to make something positive-ish out of it. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
And
Okay.
so I do write songs about invisible disabilities, chronic
Yeah.
pain, that kind of thing. That's one of the themes that I keep going on about. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, and
So,
of course, notably the song on the last album with the
yes,
title on your
yeah.
T-shirt.
I'm tired and everything hurts. Yeah.
Oh, I mean, I believe the first line is about that people, say, "How are you?" But
Yes, yeah. So
it's usually just a sort of a polite thing, not
yeah. So this is.
expecting.
I think for quite a lot of us with invisible disabilities, people say, "How are you?" and it's very well intentioned. Usually, it's not, as you're like alluding to, it's not usually, please could you list your current problems. It's
Yeah,
usually, this is a this is what is expected next in the conversation, and you're meant to say fine and you, and then you move on.
yeah,
But it's just that difficulty of, well, I mean, sometimes people do want to know, in which case you don't want to be pretending or dishonest. On the other hand, a lot of the time it's just awkward for everyone when you find yourself then having this conversation that the other person didn't necessarily actually want to have.
yeah,
How you can have lots of different meanings or intentions. And I'm not suggesting that ever done with a negative intent, but just it can be a confusing situation for the person who's suffering to know, am I meant to actually tell you how I feel, or
hmm
am I meant to do what's normal?
yeah, yeah. Yeah, it's just true. I gotta say, we have those discussions here at home as well. So I'm familiar with it, and but that's why I found it interesting that you turned that into a song, and
Yeah,
yeah, it's
that's
an
one of
interesting one.
that's one of the things that I've been happiest about in terms of after a gig. Sometimes when somebody comes up to me who may also appear, just visually to be very healthy,
Mhm.
and they say, "Oh, that song really moved them," because they have, and then whatever condition they have, and that frustration of people assuming because you look fine that you're fine, and you
Yeah,
just can't tell just looking at somebody what's going on inside their body or their head.
yeah, 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 absolutely true. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, it's an interesting topic. But you mentioned that you have an active mind, so you're writing a lot. So I saw that you have a fairly steady output of albums. So is
Yeah,
it
so
like you're done with one and then you start working on the next one, or?
normally there's multiple things on the boil at a time,
Mm,
and so normally when we finish one album, we've got quite a lot of potential songs, which may be for the next album or might be for a completely different album years later, or a B-side to something.
yeah,
We've probably got 30 or 40 semi-finished tracks in our hard disks, but I haven't yet decided on the theme for the next album. We like to have a theme and work around that. Also, I write classical minimalist instrumental music under my own name as a solo uh, thing. So I suppose, yeah, in the last 12 years or so, I've released. Well, this is now it's the 15th album that I've
okay,
written. Yeah,
yeah,
so roughly half classical and half the rock band stuff.
yeah, okay. So you kind of you can alternate between the two
Yeah, I tend to
things.
be about an album a year, roughly. A
Yeah.
little bit more than that, probably.
Okay.
But it's getting a bit harder because of my eyes, um, my retina's degenerating, and
Yeah.
a lot of what I do is dependent on, for me, doing the music on the laptop has been like a real escape, getting away from the stuff that hurts me. I can do it lying down.
Yeah.
Now that it's more difficult visually for me, that's
Yeah.
quite frustrating, and
Yeah.
that's probably going to slow me down a bit. But I'm still very determined to keep churning out what I can until I drop.
Yeah, yeah, I understand that. I mean, it's your passion, and
Yeah.
yeah. So, if we look at the new album, which is it was released at the beginning of March on Bandcamp, The Uncertainty
Yes.
Principle, and there will be a physical release, I believe, at the beginning of April.
So we gave ourselves a bit of leeway because not being sure how long exactly it would take for the pressings to come back. So when people are ordering it, we are sending them out now. So yeah, the CDs are available, Bandcamp and from various distributors. And then at the end of May, it will be on things like Spotify and Apple and those kind of places as well. But we thought we'd have a bit of time for the people who've been supporting it on Bandcamp and physical media to have it first.
Yeah, 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 yeah. It's good. Bandcamp is I think, at least in the progressive community, a growing platform for people to
Yeah, I
release their
mean,
music on.
for us, I find Bandcamp extremely helpful. I like the platform. Yeah.
I knew you in the abstract when we were battling equations. When you thought we were above the trivial things.
I was looking at the album. There's a whole description of what it's all about, and normally when you think progressive rock, you think of wizards and you think of fantasy imagery, Lord of the Rings.
Yeah.
And then you guys come in with quantum physics.
Yeah.
It's quite something different. So how did you come up with the idea for the album?
I mean, in some ways, it goes back to my medical work in that I used to teach about cognitive errors in leading to misdiagnoses, and some of the ones that I would commonly see would be overconfidence and excessive certainty. The album before last was called The Confidence Trick, which was about overconfidence. Excessive certainty is something that I think does a lot of harm in life, and is underappreciated as a problem. So we tend to gravitate towards opinions given by people who are very certain, but how certain you are doesn't necessarily correlate to how accurate you are, and maybe sometimes negatively. So, the more deeply you understand something, the less simple it may actually seem.
Yeah.
Now, that's the general theme of uncertainty, but I've also got an interest in history of science, history of physics, and I was reading about I listen to a lot of audiobooks. I have a lot of, at night. It's often difficult for me to sleep with my back, and I have to I have to lie on my side a lot of the time. Can't really listen to music very well like that because with the ears I'd have to do it in mono, and I don't enjoy music in mono very much. So I listen to a lot of speech-based things at night, lots of audiobooks, and some of them related to Werner Heisenberg, the physicist who developed the uncertainty principle, which is one of the cornerstones of quantum mechanics. And quantum mechanics, although it is a theory that when you explain it in words sounds totally ridiculous, is the most accurate prediction of reality that's ever been discovered in science. And without it, mobile phones, computers, satellite, all the modern technology we depend on totally is dependent on quantum physics to work. But nonetheless, intuitively, it sounds like nonsense. But nonetheless, it's true because we're not we're not very good at understanding things that are at different scales to what we evolved at. So tiny things and enormous things don't make intuitive sense to us. For songwriting, I mean, I like scientific concepts, but
I noticed.
just a song that's a list of a scientific theory or something, or just a description of it, would be not necessarily a good song. I think you also need, or for me as a songwriter anyway, I feel I need an emotional, like a character to connect to. For me, if I've got a sense of often I'll have like a theme that I know I want to write about, but I'm waiting to come across a viewpoint character that I can be singing from the perspective of, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
So there were several instances in Heisenberg's life that relate to uncertainty and interpersonal uncertainty, and I thought that was quite interesting, given that in science he was the uncertainty principle man, but nonetheless in his own life, these uncertainties, he was no more of an expert in terms of the human side of it than anyone else.
Yeah. Okay.
So there's throughout the album, I mean, the album takes historical instance largely in chronological order from early to late through the album, and three of those relate directly to Werner Heisenberg.
Yeah. And it had a little bit of Hollywood in it, with Mo Burke. I mean, a spy, a potential assassin. So
this was to me, there are some stories that, you know, if you'd made them up as fictional stories, they just would sound too ridiculous, and it'd be like, you need to tone that down. That's too on the nose. You can't go with that. That's ridiculous. But when they're actually true historical things, you can. I mean, so in the Second World War, Heisenberg was the Germans' nuclear lead scientist. Moberg was a professional baseball player, and he was recruited as a spy to investigate Heisenberg, decide whether or not to assassinate him. Now, quite how I've got nothing against baseball players, but quite how his background would have meant that he could judge whether or not Heisenberg was close to making a nuclear weapon is entirely unclear to me, and I think also was entirely unclear to him. He went along to a public lecture he did with a gun in his pocket and with the instruction that if he thought he was close to developing a bomb, to assassinate him. But it doesn't make any sense to me. I mean, if you genuinely were on the brink of discovering how to make a nuclear bomb in the middle of a war, would you go and give a lecture on it that's open to the public?
Yeah,
it would. True. But then again, why the Germans let their top nuclear scientist go into a neutral country and do a public lecture anyway, just in terms of as an assassination risk, seems bizarre. I mean, the whole story seems to me bizarre. And so he ends up eventually tracking him down, going to the lecture. In the end, he decides spoiler alert, decides not to assassinate him. So the song ends on this enormous anticlimax. It's like, oh no, I'm not going to kill you after all. But I think for something like that, I wanted, having a viewpoint character. So the idea of a character who's sent out of their depth to investigate this genius and decide whether or not he needs to be assassinated. That character then was the entry point for me into the emotional meaning of that song.
Yeah, I gotta say that song was really amazing. I mean, had a lot to it, but I gotta say I enjoyed the entire album.
Thank you.
What I did notice is that I picked up different influences throughout the album, musical influences. So does that reflect also the kind of music that you yourself are influenced by?
If if you don't mind me asking, which influences would you say? And I can say whether they're ones that I'm aware of as influences. I mean, the obvious ones to me would be Marillion and Pink Floyd.
Yeah, well, I didn't pick up bands or anything, but more
Oh, okay.
styles of music. So it's yeah, the more the kind of jazz elements in it, the classical elements in it.
Yeah.
Yeah, all these kinds of different things. I mean, I've been listening to the album so much that at a certain point, I'm just enjoying the music and not
Oh,
thinking
thank you.
anymore.
Yeah, I'm certainly there is a big classical influence, or particularly contemporary classical influence on my writing. And yeah, we're also influenced by rock and prog, and some metal is maybe even a little hint of early Iron Maiden in some bits in that Uncertainty Principle song. And there is this album's got more the jazzy bits than
Yeah.
most of our previous stuff. Yeah, what other influence we got? Yeah, the kind of experimental type side of classical music as well. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, I gotta say it works really well.
Thank
There
you.
were a couple of songs that really kind of stood out for me. There were two adjoining Copenhagen
Yeah.
and a cause and effect, but not necessarily in that order. I kind of like the title as well, but what I love there is the atmosphere and in Copenhagen, especially the guitar parts. But with cause and effect, also the fact that it kind of starts with a little bit mysterious and then it kind of turns kind of quirky and
Yeah.
yeah, I kind of I
Thank
like
you.
that vibe in it. So
Yeah. I mean, Copenhagen. Several of the stories in the album are quite melancholic, and I think that song is maybe a good example of that. Slightly, it is slightly sinister, but more kind of sad. I mean, he's disappointed. He's world weary. So that one is from the point of view of Heisenberg's former mentor, Niels Bohr, and they had a meeting in occupied Copenhagen. Niels Bohr was, in an occupied country, and Heisenberg was, part of the government or any government employee of the occupying power, and they had a meeting, and it left Niels Bohr very angry. And they disputed the contents of the conversation, and we'll never know for certain exactly what was said. But to me, that having these two architects of the physics of uncertainty, having this disputed historical interaction, and that we can never know for certain, is interesting. But also the human aspect of, they'd explored the universe in a very naive isn't quite the right word, but I mean, in a way that was outside of politics or anything day to day. Before there was any thought, before there was any thought that you might make a nuclear weapon out of that kind of thing, when it was just an abstract thing of, wouldn't it be nice to know how the universe works? And they were doing all this very interesting stuff together, and then discovering that actually they had very different points of view on major aspects, like which side of the war to be on.
yeah.
I don't want to give up, but I want to give in. But I'm scared, so let's not go there. I keep smiling so you might not notice that I'm falling apart. I'm close to an edge, I need help. If this time you're really asking, I'm tired and everything hurts.
Yeah, I do quite enjoy we try and intersperse instrumental tracks between some of the intense lyrical ones. Normally our albums are about 50-50 instrumental and songy. This one, we didn't plan it on being like that, but it just ended up being predominantly songs with vocals.
Yeah.
But that's not a it's not like that's our deliberate choice of what we're always going to do. Normally we end up being about 50-50.
Okay.
I find the instrumental ones much easier as a producer. One of the problems of being being your own producer, which isn't, I'm not necessarily recommending it, but because also I'm quite shy, I think we find it easier to do stuff in-house rather than actually having to deal with other people. So we end up, Mark and I do pretty much all of it ourselves, the producing and then I do the mixing and mastering, and we do the artwork together and all the packaging and stuff. But the instrumentals are much easier for me as a producer, because you're not having to listen to your own voice. I mean, it's much, it's kind of like if you're playing a synth, you kind of choose the sounds that come out. You choose the patch.
That's true.
I know that with guitar, although I always am surprised when you hear two different guitarists playing on exactly the same guitar, and amps and pedals can sound completely different. But you do get a lot of choice over your sound as a guitarist in terms of what amps you're using or amp emulations and effects. As a vocalist, you have some choice as to how you sing, but essentially the sound of your voice is what it is, and you don't, it's not so easy to hide behind the guitar pedals or a nice synth patch.
That's true.
It feels very exposed, kind of when you're listening to your own voice and editing it and doing that kind of stuff. But normally, Mark and I, we bounce files between the two of us. And I'll send him something and he'll have a listen and be like, or maybe more this or that, and we'll discuss and then make changes. And it's quite an iterative process. And quite often we'll end up with 100 versions or more of a track before we both agree, right, yep, that's it, that's done. And often the changes are quite small between, but the ones that are instrumentals almost always take many fewer versions before we're both happy.
Okay, yeah. But you the whole process of the album, how much time in general does it take?
About a year or so from. I mean, I suppose it's a bit earlier when you first have the concept, because usually we're starting on one when the previous one's not yet finished. But roughly about a year.
Okay, yeah. There was another interesting topic in the album, and I was kind of figuring how that does fit in, but I kind of understand now. Vasily Arkhipov.
Yes. So in the Cuban Missile Crisis, there was a submarine that was kind of trapped deep down in the ocean near Cuba, and their radio stopped working. They could no longer contact Moscow, which was interpreted by two of the main leaders of the submarine as being evidence that World War III had started, and therefore that they should launch their nuclear torpedoes at the nearby American aircraft carrier, which very likely would have had a negative outcome. He and Arkhipov, he happened to be on that submarine that day. It normally would only have required the two people to agree to launch, but because he was on board, those three officers had to be unanimous, and he was under a lot of pressure to agree to fire, and he refused, and he got told off for it when he got back as well. But on the other hand, he may well have avoided World War III.
Yeah.
So I think, I'm quite drawn to the historical stories that may be quite dark, but also have an element of hope. So something there where an individual deciding to resist the pressure and actually say no can have a world-changing effect.
Yeah, yeah. I can imagine that there's being put a lot of pressure on him at that point, and
And
I also now realize how that fits in with the whole idea of the uncertainty principle.
yeah, so he's making a decision in a position of uncertainty. So they can't get in
Yeah,
contact with Moscow. They're cut off from all the information. And also, nuclear weapons are independent on quantum physics. You know, it was an offshoot of the physics projects ultimately. So it's got a couple of ways in which the themes of the album lead into nuclear war as a
yeah.
topic. Mm.
Yeah, okay. Now, when you come across a character like him, like Arkhipov, and you decide like that's an interesting thing to include in the album, how do you go about to create a song around that character?
So sometimes it's from reading or hearing a phrase. It might just be a couple of words which seem to suggest either a rhythm or a melodic shape, and that is often the key thing that then the rest of the song crystallizes out from, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
Um, um, yeah, that's often the kind of thing, or just thinking about the themes. So for that particular song, I'm not sure if there was a particular phrase from what I was reading about that directly led to it, but the idea of us not, again, that uncertainty. We don't actually really know who we are. We don't have
Yeah.
perfect knowledge of ourselves. We don't know who we are until we're forced to decide. You know, until you're actually in a situation where you then have to make a decision and you find out, actually, are you one of the heroes, or are you somebody who's going to take the path of least resistance, which might lead to disasters for other people? That song was also influenced by, sometimes people talk in terms of history about, you know, major figures or ordinary people, or politicians talk about ordinary people, and I've always hated that phrase, in that I think that there are, you know, potentially billions of very extraordinary people if they're put in a situation where you find out what you're capable of. So if
Yeah.
you read things like stories of, you know, what people did to protect vulnerable people, say during the Holocaust, people who
Hmm.
risked their own
Yeah.
lives to save others, these weren't necessarily famous big people, inverted commas, in terms of historically. These were often people who, had they not been in an extraordinary circumstance where they had to make a choice, would have been regarded by lots of people as, you know, ordinary people
Yeah.
doing you know, the jobs in, they wouldn't have come to attention of many people, but you've got no idea which people are extraordinary until you're in a position where you have to decide.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
that's
Okay.
one of the things that had been going around my head, and then coming across that particular story of, well, here's somebody who we wouldn't normally think of as a hero, the sort of political commissar type figure
Yeah.
in a Soviet nuclear submarine. You would normally, in most traditional Western narratives, that would be a baddie figure. That wouldn't necessarily be
Yeah. Yeah.
your hero. Um, but then when the time came, he said no. So that was how that song came about, I think.
Yeah. So in a way, I mean, if I read this and hear your stories about how these well, the themes and the influences story-wise are, it's a lot to take in. It's if you think about it, there are some quite well serious and maybe even some heavy topics in it.
Yeah.
But at the same time, when I listen to the album, I don't feel that. I really am enjoying it. I'm really it's giving me kind of a positive vibe and not
Good.
thinking too much about all these heavy things. So It's interesting that with this in this way you can look at the album in different ways.
Yeah.
You can just listen to the music and hear the more uplifting part of it, but you can also combine it with the story and have a different kind of experience. So yeah.
Yeah, I mean, thanks. I mean, certainly would be. I mean, we're very grateful to anybody who listens in whatever way they wish to. So if somebody has a particular song they like and they just like the sound of it, that's fine. If somebody wants to listen and follow through all the themes and the stories, that's also great. I mean, I think sometimes as a writer, having the ideas for the themes maybe primarily for my benefit, it helps me to structure an album and to come up with the ideas. And in terms of how we structure it, Mark and I work together on the sequencing of which songs in which orders to try and give it a sense of flow and narrative. But if somebody just wants to enjoy an individual song out of context, we're perfectly happy with that. We don't, although it's written as an album, if somebody wants to enjoy it on a playlist shuffling things, that's also fine.
Yeah. But is it kind of intended as a concept album? Or and that is something I learned. I did an interview with Clive Nolan recently, and he said that there's a difference between a concept album and a conceptual album.
I don't know in terms of the specific definitions. And we have done in the past an album that basically told a story going from the beginning to the end of a fictional story, which was basically a sort of traditional concept album. And then most of our other albums, possibly all of them, have had a theme that kind of links all the songs together, but not necessarily telling a specific narrative from song to song, if you know what I mean?
Yeah.
I would think this album is somewhere between the two, in that we've got, several songs about one particular historical character at different parts of their life.
Mm-hmm.
On the other hand, we've got other songs that are more about coming to the idea of uncertainty from different angles. And hopefully it comes together in a way that makes flows as an album.
Yeah. Well, what I experienced when listening to the album, it definitely flows. It's an absolute pleasure to listen to. So I can highly recommend.
Thank you very
anyone
much.
Watching this, listen to the album, The Uncertainty Principle. Get a copy, either digital on Bandcamp or order the CD. I'm old school. I always want everything on CD, so I'm going to order the CD definitely.
Thank you.
Because I'm also curious, of course, about the artwork and the booklet and everything.
Yeah.
So
for Mark and I, the artwork and the whole package is really important part of the project. So we generally, for most of the songs, we have a specific artwork that goes with it. We have a 24-page booklet.
Nice.
Explaining some of the stories, and also with art that relates to it. And hopefully it makes a whole package rather than just a bunch of songs.
Yeah, I think it will. So I'm really happy that I have discovered Hats Off Gentlemen, It's Adequate.
Well, thank you very much for your kind support.
Yeah, and well, it was a pleasure to talk to you. Thank you for taking the time.
Well, thank you very much for your time. Lovely to chat.
Yeah, and well, good luck with everything, and I wish you all the best health-wise. But of course, there's nothing to be do, but at least All right. Yeah. So thank you very much.
Thanks very much. Bye.
Thank you.